So we want to say something skillful about listening and how to listen more skillfully based on our experience with just mainly leading circling and surrender leadership workshops and trying to take the practice into life in various ways.
For me, it's also been in mediation, like conflict explorations,
Mhm.
and in like psychedelic welfare at festivals. How to? It's like it for me. It relates to like receiving someone, like not necessarily to listening to language, but hearing someone's whole being. If that makes sense.
Yeah, so like not like the way I hear that is like not taking the words literally, but being like what's actually being communicated in through this human being that's here. And I guess that is for me a lot about I guess making my body available somehow to listen or to experience the other. So it's not just words coming in that I interpret, but it's like I am taking you in, which seems to enable me to be with people in a way that is usually a lot more satisfying for me and for others.
I'm looking a bit on how to step into that. I noticed I have some experiences with this where I'm unsure what makes sense to bring. Some of it will sound pretty weird, I think, if not contextualized properly. There's what I hear from you that I recognize is like there's a way where am I placing my attention, and can I split my attention? Because there's a lot of different signals when somebody is communicating or like just even being there, and some of it is attending, like the appearance of them, how they are there, what can I see on their expression, and then there's something with like what can I hear on their voice and what's there in the semantics of their words. But that making myself available is also like what are the emotions evoked in me as I'm listening? What are my impulses? Like, and for me, like the impulses, they have started to play a larger role, I think. I often have, if I feel, I often listen to what if I relaxed all of like my what I call it, social blocks. Like if I didn't care, what would I do with them right now? And sometimes I feel like there's like a sense of like I would physically attack them, or I would come in and like take care of them. And I started to use that as a clue to check with them, like what are you scared, or like are you relating to me as a parent figure, or like I don't know, there are like a lot of clues, I think, that have proven to be useful.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, and interestingly, as it often is when we're talking about how we do things, I get fascinated with how you see things in more, well, in detail in a different way than I do. So it's like when I try to speak into this now, I don't so much, I wouldn't separate sort of, oh, I see something and I hear something and I feel something. It's more like there's like a wholeness of what's it like to be with someone else that I can sink into more and more.
Mm.
And trust more and more. And the way I would hold it is like there is some kind of knowing that is there. That when someone is with me and they're speaking or just communicating to me, there's so much information and so much impact that I often don't trust or ignore somehow, or I'm tense there, so it's, I don't get in touch with it. And the practice for me is like, can I relax into that and allow all of that impact? And then there is some kind of like, oh, I'm actually hearing a lot. And it might not make sense. I might not have clarity on what's going on in the other, but there does seem to be it does seem to be easier to respond appropriately somehow, and at least to do this thing that I call something like listening for love, where it's like hearing the deeper longings or needs in what's spoken than what might be the sort of direct communication in words. Yeah.
Yes. So many different paths that like open up by listening to you. I think like interestingly or importantly for me in this context especially, it's like something about the pedagogy or didactics of skillful listening. Like how do we, what is it that makes this available? Like how have I learned this? How do I teach it? And I think the reason that this has arisen for us within like circling relational practices is that it's not a thing that you can explain to someone and then, oh yeah, now I get it, and then you can do it. But it's like like most skills actually, it's like a repetition of attempting something and then checking the result. And that the container of surrender leadership or circling is very good for that, because you can see what you're sensing and you can ask or you can check, or and I mean that's like a whole complex thing in itself, because you might be sensing things that the person themselves are not aware of. So it's not always that easy. but a lot of you gain a body of experience by practicing again and again. And it's like a situation where everyone are like tuning into listening to each other and listening to ourselves and talking about what we're noticing. So it's a very good learning container. And I think one thing that I thought about as well with listening, because I think what happens often, it's like there's some kind of progression that I'm getting hints of like that initially when I came into this, and I think I see this in a lot of people that I meet in the world, that like we're very busy with so many things happening in us that it's very hard to listen. Like we're constantly preoccupied with what am I going to say next? How am I looking? What are they thinking about me? Like it's a quite self oriented way of being. And there's like a way of, it's a way that where the practices we do to help people settle more in like being okay with who they are and being okay with trusting that what people are seeing is what's here and it's okay. And that opens up the possibility of actually hearing someone else more. And so that's like a first kind of step. And then there's like a second kind of step that I think you're speaking into, which is when we start to drop this becomes more like spiritual territory, like not superstitious or like supernatural, but like when we allow ourselves to relax, like the next subtle level of being somebody who is experiencing someone else, and we're more purely there with experience, then the sensation of listening is just a thing. Information just arises, and it's not seeing stuff and drawing conclusions, but the conclusions just appear in a way. Buddhists call that transcendental wisdom, but it's basically just a relaxation.
There's something for me that I don't know, maybe I want to make it a bit more simple or accessible in some way. At least there's, and I often struggle with the didactics of this, as you know, that I'm more like apparently started doing some things through practice, and now I've forgotten how I learned it largely. But like, there's definitely a thing that I do and that can be practiced, which is like hearing what is said and then listening for the subtext of what is said, which I imagine that most people can relate to quite clearly. That it's like the thing that is said in words is not the full communication here. And that for me is like, and that, well, that idea goes pretty deep, or you can do that in many layers, but starting to do that more and being able to mirror back what is heard in the subtext is a pretty powerful practice, I find. So that is like, oh, you're saying that you don't like being here right now and you would like something to change. It's like, okay, I hear that, but like is there, are you a bit anxious right now? Like what's going on the emotional level? Could there be loneliness? Could there be not feeling part of the group? And like now I sort of went a bit more into just guessing, and that can be part of it. But often it is like it's also imaginative situations. It's hard not to guess. But often there is some kind of real intuition of like, oh, is this what's going on? Or just getting curious about, oh, is there more to this than what you brought right now? And that's definitely a part of becoming more skillful at listening for me. This just really being with what is said, but then also inquiring into it, like really the sort of the actual curiosity, not the I'm really curious about you, pretend curiosity, but like, oh, I actually want to know what's going on. Yeah. I feel like I'm rambling a bit, so I'll leave it up to you to get us back to structure, if you're willing.
I think we should round this up soon. But one thing that comes to mind as I'm listening to you was John Vervaeke, who's like a guy who talks about these things as well. I heard him talk about Stoics and one practice they had of like really separating like what is happening on like a concrete level and what's happening on my interpretative symbolic level. And I think that's part of what you're speaking into. And I think it's cool when learning to separate those a bit, and then also being attuned to the fact that other people are in their own symbolic interpretative world. And sometimes you can see a lot of like, it's, I don't know, like this is again me being more detail oriented because I'm curious about how these things happen. You don't need to notice the details that I'm describing to do this, because you're doing it without noticing the details. And the details for me are something I'm picking out after I learn it, not using it to learn it. But there's like a noticing in people small eye movements and like small facial expressions. Like you can pick up when things are spoken. You can see what interpretations people make, or like you can make pretty educated guesses. And sometimes it arises for me, oh, this can be heard this way or that way. And I saw that person hear it that way, and that person heard it the other way. And now they're talking and they're not understanding each other. And then simply saying it like in a way where they understand, like, oh, this was said, and I think you heard this and you heard this, and now you're talking with this misunderstanding. They can be like, oh yeah, well, what's going on? And I think that's definitely one skill of listening that I've picked up since I started with circling. I remember being very impressed with people who could do this when I came into circling. And now it seems to happen quite naturally after several years of practicing.
Yes, for me that's what I would call like translation work that we often do as leaders, where it's like it often happens when there's conflict, I guess, or that's where it's often most used or necessary, where it's like, yeah, for me it does have this quality of like speaking. It maybe is a little bit different than what you're saying, because you're talking about different interpretations. Well, the way I would speak to it is like it's taking it a level more into intimacy. Is often what I do when I translate. So from taking it from something that might be charged and conflicty, and then taking it a step down into something that's more about needs and longings and love, ultimately. And sort of supporting that if it's not already happening in between two people or in a group.
For me, that's more when there's not like a point of misunderstanding the same thing, but it's more like not really seeing where the other is coming from and then helping them get that.
I heard, I talked to Diane Hamilton, who's a Zen teacher, the other day, and I think she said that I really liked related to listening is she said that you don't have to agree to what's being said to be able to listen.
Mm.
And I like that just really struck me, like how much of a trap that has been and still is for me in some situations, that I have this like I'm already in there trying to figure out what I agree with and don't agree with. Like this is obviously when I'm in more sort of triggered states. And when I'm sort of relaxed, it's more like, oh, like it's your expression, and I don't have to actually react to your expression. I can let it be your expression and check if it is really your expression, and maybe even that I intuit something about your expression that's not in there that could be important information. It's just a very different way of relating to someone, I think.
Mm. I think that's one like easily trainable skill, or like action to train that specific thing, is active listening, where you're mirroring what you've heard.
Mm.
That kind of breaks the thing we talked about earlier, like being too preoccupied with your own world to hear someone else.
Mm.
If you start with just like trying to actually hear them, to like say what they said in a way where you show them you understood them,
Mm.
it's a pretty good way to demonstrate your misunderstandings and to like come into more of a shared reality about what's being said.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
to orient around, like it's both, because there's one, this is interesting, there's one part of listening that is receiving and understanding. There's another part of listening that is demonstrating to the other that you are listening and receiving. That is also important. And you can be the best listener, and the person won't feel listened to if you don't demonstrate it somehow.
Mm. Yeah, there's something with the willingness to show up with them, like with like bringing my listening into connection. And I do imagine that a lot of people in these kind of workshop spaces that we spend a lot of our time in are really good listeners, and take a lot in and sort of see a lot. Or I don't actually imagine this. I'm completely convinced that this is happening for most people who are sitting in these spaces, because when we spend 8 hours in a workshop room together and you haven't spoken much during the whole day, I do have this like, you probably have a lot of insight to bring about what you have seen and heard during the day. So it's like there is something to I guess I just want to speak to the beauty of people bringing out their listening. And I guess also that it's a bit vulnerable to do that. So that might be why we don't always do it. But it is really rich to get that shared somehow. Like just what's actually being heard. That is often where we meet, right? And I guess the opposite polarity of that is listening and resenting. So it's like I'm hearing how people are not showing up fully, or like I hear what's under what's being said, and I'm resenting people for not speaking the truth or not speaking what's really there, which I also imagine happens a lot. I can definitely remember doing a lot of that when I started with circling. Um, hmm.
I think there's another position within the landscape you're describing that I want to bring in. And it's like, I think as human beings, we are or like as animals, as human beings, like biologically, we are always hearing a lot. Like we're taking in, and we're being affected and impacted by what's going on. And then we develop ways to hide that from ourselves and just like contract around repetitive thinking or like repetitive movement, or like we devise ways to be more maybe independent or protected, or and I think people who have ended up there, I think this is how it was for me. Like I was very independent and very shielded, and I imagined that from within here I could develop some kind of like more tricks to hear more. But what actually eventually worked was to relax a bit more and notice that it was already, all of it was already there. Like it's not listening isn't really like it added. There are some things that are like added skills, like the mechanics of like mirroring someone, and like there are ways to practice, but it's mostly about coming more into something, or like doing a bit less. That I think it's easily lost when you talk about it, or when we talk about it as skills or like things to develop. It's more like undeveloping some skills we've learned.
Yeah.
Mostly.
Yeah, I'm smiling as we often end up in this place, and I find this place wonderful. Yeah, so the Wu way of things, the sort of unlearning of tension in my body being seems to be core, and then yeah, as one of my Tai Chi teachers would say, it's like you need a little bit of technique, but only a little bit, and that's like the skill, and then everything else is actually about the becoming more relaxed in my being in the world, so I can be with what's actually there, like welcome it in somehow.
Yeah, at least this is a good. I don't agree with it actually. I notice, although it's the best way to talk about it, but it's because it's so complicated to talk about this because of how we construct identity and construct sense of self. But there are skills, like real skills that develop in us. It's just that it's not, it can't be done within the like in the intentional mind. It's not enough to just relax and then you're really good at this. But what's needed is to relax and be in situations where you learn, but not by like doing an active thing that is a learning. It just happens. But yeah, I think that's how I don't agree that it's just relaxation. But the relaxation is really important, to seize the idea that you're trying to learn, and to just trust that with enough. It's like now we have the metaphors of these AI stuff. You can just trust that with enough training data, you'll pick up the skill somehow, mysteriously.
Yeah, I I wouldn't say that it's you can just relax. There's also something with what relaxing means that makes it like words are difficult.
It's definitely not like slouching.
Yeah, exactly. It's not collapse, which is what we often talk about it as relaxation, but and well, I guess what I heard you say now that I want to repeat back, or like what I also find important is practice. Like practice spaces matter. It's like I would not be as skillful a listener as I think I am these days without spending 10 years in quite a lot of relating practice spaces. Like that has definitely made a difference for me. And I wouldn't have gotten there by imagining that I could just relax and find it. So yeah, so there's something with the circumstances and the practices that we get into that really matter.
And the large part for me with being in the practice spaces, different practice spaces are differently conducive to learning. It's also important to have role models where you're seeing skillful behavior. It's you can. I think this has been my life's biggest mistake. I think that it took me so long before I accepted having teachers. I wanted to learn everything on my own, and it's cool in some ways, but it's really slow, and I think it's very easy to start walking down the wrong direction.
Yeah. And I do think it is like, well, one thing is the teacher, but another is the feedback that is not necessarily from authority, but from someone who's willing to give real feedback to what I'm experiencing, which has also seemed to matter a lot in doing a lot of circling and surrender leadership. Well, I've never done much meditation practice, but I imagine that compared to sort of the figuring things out by going through sort of the internal investigation on my own, I imagine that it's a lot, at least for me, it is a lot faster to just be with someone where I get immediate feedback. In Tai Chi at an embodied level, in circling and surrender leadership also at an embodied level, but also in language and communication and yeah. All right.
I think to sum it up.
Great, you do
that. I don't think people who listen to us learned that much about active or learned that much about skillful listening. It's important to listen and like think about, but what we're agreeing on is that it's the what do you call it? Coming into practice spaces. There's like a good word that is evading me at the moment. Immersing yourself in the practice. That is the key thing. And then spending some time also reflecting on what's going on. I think that helps, or at least I really like doing it.
I think you gave a really important other key before that I want to repeat. That is like pointed at the difference between being very separate inside of myself and thinking that I can become better at listening by doing particular tricks, like finding methods that will sort of do that for me. If I just know these tricks, it's a little bit like I see pickup artistry, kind of that. It's like there's these tricks that you can do, and then you'll get girls, and that's not what we're advocating. That there seems to be a different way that is more about your own embodiment, like how you're holding yourself. That if you become a bit more permeable, you will actually hear more. If you're a bit more sensitive to the people around you, you're able to be with them in a different way.
Mm.